Hey y'all, I'm Hope, and today I'm going to be reorganizing my bookshelves. This has been something I've been meaning to do for a good long while. It needs it. I'm not happy with the organization. This side's currently alphabetical order. This side is not. This is just kind of categories that make sense to me. And I think what I'm going to do is take everything off of these shelves, put them in categories that make sense to me, and group like all of the books by a single author together, because right now I have like some of my Nicholas Kaufman books are over here, some of them are over here, stuff like that. Some I think Sylvia Moreno Garcia is also split up. So I want to put all of my books by a single author together again, and then kind of also organize a little bit by topic and type and things like that. But I'm gonna take everything off, pile it up, figure it out, put it back on the shelves, and then put all of my little knickknacks. And then when I'm done organizing, I'm gonna give you guys a bookshelf tour, because I have not actually done a bookshelf tour at any point. I've meant to do one several different times, and I've never done one because at the time I didn't feel like I had the tools to do it well. And I do now. I have a camera that's on a tripod that's tall enough that you can actually see some of my higher shelves and things like that. So that is the plan for today, and I'm gonna get started. I actually have already started. I have some books on my bed that are ones that were kind of stacked on the front of the shelves, and I've started taking off some of the decorations. But I'm gonna take the rest of that stuff down, and then I'm gonna get started on the actual organizing, and I'm gonna see, can I move you guys back? It's probably gonna make the audio a little bit weird, but let's see if I do that. This is a hard place to film because my bed is actually like right here next to the camera and next to the tripod, so trying to get everything in frame is semi-difficult. I think that'll work. Probably won't be able to hear me as well if I'm back there, but we're gonna try it, and I'm just gonna get started on taking everything apart. Okay, all of the decorations are off, and now I get to take off all the books, and that's gonna be the hard part, especially because my cat is currently causing a ruckus. Let's see if I can show you this little dude. Whoops. Sir. I don't even know what he's chasing. There's no toy. He's made a game for himself. Okay, everything is off my shelves. I gotta get some water. I'm very tired now. I gotta put all this shit back on there. Anyway, let me release you here, and this is what all of this looks like piled up on my desk. Not desk, my bed, my chair, and there's some on the floor because I ran out of room. But yeah, I own something like 500 total books. This is probably, I would guess, a little over 400 because I have some that are audiobooks and ebooks. But yeah. Anyway, here you go. That's what all of that looks like. Next up is putting everything back and sorting through everything. I do have a sense of kind of the categories I want to go with, but first I need to get some water. The books are back on the shelves. I have not put the decorations on. I'm not going to for now. because obviously it's time for a tour. Okay, now that I have inhaled some lunch, we are ready for the tour, and this will be my first ever book tour, so I'm pretty excited. We're gonna start in here on this side, go all the way down to the bottom of this shelf, then come up to the top and go all the way down again, and then I have a few books that are on a shelf in my office instead. So then we'll move over there and I'll show you those. Starting up here on my top left shelf, I have all of my classics and basically what I termed books that inspired other things. I started with like prose, poetry, and like short things first. So I've got my copy of The Divine Comedy by Dante, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight by an unknown author. I've got a book of 4 plays by Christopher Marlowe, which includes Tamburlaine, The Jew of Malta, Edward II, and Dr. Faustus. And then I've got my Shakespeare collection. Of these, I've got 2 that I've read, because I've read Hamlet, and I've read The Merchant of Venice, and I have not read Titus Andronicus, Midsummer Night's Dream, or Richard II yet, but I am hoping to. And then I have The Fairy Queen, Book 2 by Edmund Spenser. This is like a 6-book epic poem kind of a thing, and I only have book 2 because that's what I needed for class. Tucked in here I have my favorite play, Cyrano de Bergerac, which is a French play that I think is really fun. Then I've got my 2 really chunky ones. I've got Tales and Poems by Edgar Allan Poe and Complete Fiction of Lovecraft, along with my Lovecraft biography. And, whoops, sorry, I've got like the yellow wallpaper, Vindications, both of The Rights of Men and The Rights of Woman by Wollstonecraft, Letter to the Women of England and the Natural Daughter by Mary Robinson, Charlotte Smith, Major Poetic Works, Letters Written in France in the Summer of 1790 by Helen Maria Williams, my least favorite book of all time, Orinoco by Aphra Behn, which I again needed for class, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and then I have my Jane Austen collection. I have all 6 of her major works. I haven't gotten Lady Susan yet, although I want to, and I've read 3 of these? 2 of these. I've fully read Pride and Prejudice and Northanger Abbey, and I'm currently reading Persuasion for class, and then I'm going to come back maybe over the summer and read the other 3 that I haven't read yet. And then I have my stuff by the Brontes. I don't have anything by Anne Bronte, but I have Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. And then I have my Alexander Dumas books, and among those I have Count of Monte Cristo and the Three Musketeers. I had another one, but I got rid of it. And then I have this, which I just love. This is my original copy of The Three Musketeers, which I got at a used bookstore, and it looked like this when I got it. I carried it around with me for a while, intending to read it and never read it. And then I finally got a copy that will actually survive my reading it, but I love this cover on this old edition, so I've just been hanging on to it. This next shelf down is going to be a little easier for me to reach. Apologies if it sounds like my voice is moving, it's because it is. I'm having to walk around the camera. First of all, I've got my Oscar Wilde stuff, so we're still in classics at this point. I've got the uncensored picture of Dorian Gray, which also is an annotated edition with some scholarly annotations, which I'm pretty excited to read at some point. I have a complete works of Oscar Wilde, and then I have a separate copy of The Picture of Dorian Gray, because it's one of my favorite classics, and I want to be able to read, like, just this one. And that is the later censored edition. And then I have this, like, cute little book I got while I was studying in Ireland. It's called Romping Through Dorian Gray, and it's a bunch of, like, little things about, like, tidbits about the story, about the time. There's a little, is it in the back? There's a little map of, like, places that Oscar Wilde lived when he lived in Dublin, or places that he would have frequented, and there's, like, a little walking tour you can take, and I've done that, and it was very fun, so I love this little book. And I have A Room with a View by E.M. Forster, which is another one of my favorite classics, which I read for class. And then I have Dracula, because obviously that has inspired a lot of things. I have not read Dracula yet, and I was supposed to read it in February. It didn't happen. Oh well. Then I have The Last Man by Mary Shelley, which I have not read yet, but I want to. It's a apocalyptic story about a guy who is the last man on Earth after a deadly plague has wiped out the rest of humanity. Sounded like it was going to hit a little too close to home during the pandemic, so I have not read it yet. And then I have this beautiful copy of Frankenstein, which is, again, one of my favorite classics. I love this book so much, and I've just reread it recently for a class. So there actually will be, when I bring it back in, there's going to be an additional copy of Frankenstein I need to fit on this shelf. But I will deal with that at a later date. So after that, I have basically books that have been directly inspired by something. This is kind of loosely structured. It's not 100% just things that have been directly inspired. You'll see as we go along. But that was kind of my next thought, was things that are inspired by mythology or by a specific previous work, things like that. So starting, I have all of my Frankenstein books, except for one of them that's over here, because these are all my Frankenstein adaptations, and then I wanted to keep all my Junji Ito stuff together, so that's here. And then my last Frankenstein adaptation, which is a graphic novel by Victor Laval, which I think is brilliant, and I normally don't love graphic novels, but this one is really well done. And then I have my other Victor Laval book, which is a direct retelling of a story by H.P. Lovecraft. So there's The Ballad of Black Tom. Another Lovecraft-inspired one, we have Lovecraft Country. And then I get into stuff inspired by Dracula. So I have A Diary of Blood by S.T. Gibson. That's the only one I have that's directly inspired, but then I put all of my vampire books together. So we've got the first 3 of the Vampire Chronicles. I used to have more, but I am unhauling them, which you will see in a unhaul either just before or just after this video goes up. I also have Silver Under Nightfall by Ren Chiapeko, which I'm really excited to read because I've been hearing some great things. And recently, Becca from Becca and the Books she had a vlog where she was reading this, and she ended up DNFing it because she didn't like it. And I was really enjoying watching that vlog because everything that she said about this book told me that I was going to love it. Like, the reason she DNF'd it told me that it's going to be right up my alley, so I'm really excited. I have my, is this a Lumicrate or Fairy Loot? I think it's a Lumicrate. Empire of the Vampire. It's incredibly fine. I haven't finished reading it. I've read like 200 pages. And then I have Woman Eating by Claire Coda, which is a recent edition. I'm really excited to read this one. Got Certain Dark Things by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. And I've just realized that that got separated from my other Sylvia Moreno Garcia books. I can fix that, that's fine. I will deal with that later. Then I have my Southern Book Club Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix, and that leads into my other Grady Hendrix books. I have the Final Girl Support Group and Horror Store. These are just here together. I've read about half of the Final Girl Support Group, and I haven't read the other ones. Then I have Juniper and Thorn and The Wolf and the Woodsman, both by Ava Reed. I know this one is inspired by a specific folk tale or piece of mythology. I can't remember what it's called. Is it the Juniper Tree? Maybe? I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I know that's a specific story. And then I think also The Wolf and the Woodsman pulls a lot from Jewish mythology and Hungarian folklore. And then we have, obviously, Little Red Riding Hood in For the Wolf. Then I've got all of my Greek mythology books. So we've got Song of Achilles, Circe, and Galatea by Madeline Miller. I've read 2 of these. I have not read Song of Achilles yet. And my Jennifer Saint books, Ariadne and Electra. And then I have Burning Roses, which is inspired by Chinese mythology. And then I have my Arthurian stuff. So I have By Force Alone by Lavi Tidar and Legendborn by Tracy Dion, both of which I'm really looking forward to reading. I have the Romeo and Juliet inspired, or rather retelling of These Violent Delights. They were backwards, so we'll just fix that real quick. I've got an Alexander the Great retelling set in space. And Joan of Arc in The Genesis of Misery. So I think that one looks fun. And then The Grace of Kings and the Wall of Storms, which is the first 2 of the Dandelion Dynasty. I'm pretty sure that may have been really cutting off your view. I don't know. I know this is inspired by a specific historical period, and I cannot remember the name of it off the top of my head. I will try to remember to put that on the screen somewhere when I look it up. And then after that we have The Wind Ungone by Alice Randall, which is a retelling of Gone with the Wind. Took me longer to come up with that than I should have. Then there's the rest of my Sylvia Moreno Garcia books, because The Daughter of Dr. Moreau is a retelling of The Island of Dr. Moreau, which is a book I hated. And then I've got the rest of my Sylvia Moreno Garcias. I've started Beautiful Ones. I've read Gods of Jade and Shadow. I've read Return of the Sorceress. I haven't read Velvet Was the Night, and I have read Mexican Gothic. And then once we get to Mexican Gothic, I started thinking about, like, mushroom books and things that are kind of mushroom-like. Because this is an interest of mine right now, which is fungal horror. So I have that. And then I put Leech here by Hiram Ennis, because there's something that's kind of fungal-like in it. We have What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. And then I have this actual book on mushrooms, Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake, which I haven't read yet. Also, I'm partway through this, and I've read this. And then I have The Hungry Earth, which I'm planning to read this month, which is directly inspired by Entangled Life. So those are together. And then I have the rest of my Nicholas Kaufman books, so In the Shadow of the Axe, Chasing the Dragon, Dying is My Business, and Die and Stay Dead. And so when we get to the end of this section, it's like urban and contemporary fantasy. So that's kind of what I moved into next. So we have Library of the Dead and Our Lady of Mysterious Ailments by T.L. Huchu, which are the first and second book in the Edinburgh Nights series, which I'm really enjoying. Moving down one more shelf, we're still in the urban and contemporary fantasy section. So I have my Greta Helsing books, which are all kind of contemporary fantasy about a woman who is a doctor for the undead. Read the first one, still need to read the second two. Then I have my Elia de Bedard books, because these first three are a fantasy set in a alternate Gothic Paris, along with this one, which is a spin-off from that. And then I have a couple of sci-fi and fantasy novellas from her. Shadow All of Light by Fred Chappell is a kind of urban fantasy set in a fantastical city, so I should say I categorized urban contemporary fantasy as being like in any kind of city, so that's a fictional city. We have Light from Uncommon Stars set in like modern day California. Cemetery Boys, both unread. Well, both started. I feel like as I'm tipping them out, you can see the bookmarks I put in them. The Dark and Hollow Star, which is unread and set in Toronto. Keeper of the Night. Wicked Fox by Kat Cho. And then I have my Greenbone Saga collection. I started Jade War. You can see where I was buddy reading it with a friend, and I have not continued on because I am afraid of it. So we have Spirits Abroad, which is a short story collection, Blackwater Sister, and The Order of the Pure Moon, Reflected in Water. This is the only one of the three I've read. Then I have my N.K. Jemisin books, because The City We Became is an urban fantasy set in New York. Then I have The Killing Moon, which I have not read. I haven't read either of those. Then I have these, which are all kind of set in fantasy cities. I have Lies of Loch Lamora, Titan Shade, and Guards. Okay, on to the penultimate shelf on this side, and I apologize for the increasingly weird angle. But then I've got my, what is this series called? The Book of All Souls? All Souls? Something like that. I've got my All Souls trilogy, and I feel like that starts to put me into romantic fantasy because, romantic fantasy and sci-fi, because I know that those have a romance in them. So then I have my Restless Truth and Marvelous Light, that's the backwards order, but 1 and 2, of the Last Binding series by Foya Marsk. This is one of my all-time favorite books, and I'm excited to read this one this month, hopefully. I have the X-Hex by Aaron Sterling, of A Taste of Iron and Gold, or that's how I want it to go, A Taste of Gold and Iron. That sounds backwards to me, but that one by Alexander Rowland. Strange of Stubborn Endurance, Winter's Orbit, and Ocean's Echo, both by Eberina Maxwell. I really liked these. These are really fun. And then we get into stuff that I don't know for certain has a romance in it, but based on the description, I think they likely do. So We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faisal, Heaven Official's Blessing, which I almost forgot about, by MXTX, The Prison Healer by Lynette Noni, Jadefire Gold, This Woven Kingdom, and River Enchanted kind of fall into that. And then I know The Jasmine Throne and The Unbroken have romance elements, but I don't think that's the main part of the story. Similar thing for She Who Became the Sun and Priory of the Orange Tree. So at this point, I think we're getting into kind of general fantasy and sci-fi. So I then have my Joe Abercrombie books, Blade Itself and Before They Are Hanged. Currently reading this one, hoping to read this later this month. And then this very bottom shelf is more general fantasy and sci-fi. So there's Son of the Storm, Shadow of the Gods. You'll notice a lot of these are the beginning of series because I haven't read the first book yet, but I have those. Little Thieves by Margaret Owen, Iron Widow by Zirin J. Zhao, The Ivory Key, Once and Future Witches, Pure Nessie and Jonathan Strange, Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clark. Then I have my Lloyd Alexander books, which I've been reading for a vlog, which I'm very excited about. When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. Come on. The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nico. Ashes of the Sun by Django Wexler. Then I've got my Adrian Tchaikovsky books, who is an author I've never read from, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to love all of these. So I have Shards of Earth and Eyes of the Void, which is the Final Architecture series, and then a standalone, which is Guns of the Dawn. And then I have all my Rebecca Roanhorse books. She's one of my favorite authors. I really love her writing. So I have Tread of Angels, Black Sun, Fevered Star, and then Trail of Lightning and Storm of Locusts, which are some of my favorites. I really enjoyed those. And when we get here, I feel like there's a little subsection of like apocalyptic fantasy and sci-fi or dystopian. So I have The Salt Line as well, and then The Deep and Saarland by River Solomon, which I love both of these. These are definitely favorite books. And then Docile and First Become Ashes by Cam Sparrow. Alright, back up to the top on the other side, and we're still in kind of my general science fiction and fantasy stuff. So I've got all of my Murderbot books. I love this series and I'm really excited for the 7th book to come out this year. I have Empress of Forever by Max Gladstone. I've not read this one, but I've read some short stories by him that I really liked. I have Persephone Station by Steel Light, and my Takes Colon books by Katie Martine, which is another one of my favorite series. Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson, which I have heard some good things about. I'm so sorry, I'm struggling with words today. Then I've got my Locked Tomb series, which I'm thinking I might try and do a binge read of this later in the year, closer to when Electo comes out. I have This Golden Flame by Emily Victoria, which is a fairy loot book, I think. The Barbara Cormorant books. Got City of Brass. The Bone Maker by Sarah Beth Durst, which is an interesting sounding book about necromancy. I have a couple of V.E. Schwab's. I've never read anything by V.E. Schwab, but I want to try their writing because I know a lot of people really like it. I just haven't gotten around to it. Then I have Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, which I'm very excited about. This one was a, I think, Christmas gift from my partner's mom, which was very sweet of her, and I'm really excited to read it. Then I have Mazes of Power by Juliet Wade, Jeff Vandermeer's Hummingbird Salamander, Vagabonds by Hao Jin Fang, Never Let Me Go and Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, and Women and Other Monsters by Jess Zimmerman, which is a more like non-fiction essay collection about mythology that sounded interesting. And then I have my last kind of like general fantasy book, which is The Poppy War by R. Kwong, which I have not yet read, but I wanted to put it with my other one that I have from her, which is Babel, which I believe everybody and their mother has been reading lately, and I have not gotten to it yet, but I am looking forward to it. But that kind of leads me into dark academia. So I have The Secret History and These Violent Delights by Mike and Emma. This one is whatever, you know. Then I have 2 copies of The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake, because somebody gifted me the indie published copy right before this came out, and I was getting the Fairy Loot adult box when this came out, so then I ended up with 2 copies. Then I have If We Were Villains by ML Rio, Funny by Mona Awad, For Your Own Good by Samantha Downing, Ninth House by Lee Bardugo, The Devil Makes 3, and Summer Suns. So those are all of my dark academia books. Because I was then thinking about academia, I then led into books that are related to my own research interests. So I have an interest in game studies, and I have Understanding Video Games, Game On, which is a history of video games. Then I have these 2 books from the MIT, I can't think of what the name of this, Playful Thinking. Yeah, the Playful Thinking series from MIT Press. I have Play Like a Feminist by Shira Chess, and Player vs. Monster by Jaroslav. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. I am so sorry. Very excited about these. I really enjoyed Play Like a Feminist. I'm looking forward to reading Player vs. Monster. And then I have a couple of books that are kind of about games. So I have Firebreak and Rabbits. And then I also have a book based on a video game. I have Dishonored, The Corroded Man, which Dishonored is one of my favorite games. But this has like a very steampunk feel to it. So then I also have like some steampunk fantasy. I have An Alchemy of Masks and Mirrors. And then I have my Catherine Addison books, which are The Goblin Emperor and the spin-off series, The Cemeteries of Amalos. I have The Witness of the Dead and The Grief of Stones. And I have this absolutely beautiful Spanish edition of The Goblin Emperor. This is actually the background of my phone right now. I love this artwork. And then, again, I am so sorry, this organization makes no fucking sense to anybody but me. These are detective books. These are about a detective named Thara Kelleher. So then I was like, what about other fantasy books with detectives and lawyers? So I have The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan, which I know is supposed to be like a murder mystery in fantasy world. And then League of Liars by Astrid Schulte, which is a book about fantasy lawyers. And I have a serial killer mystery book, The Helm of Midnight by Marina Lostedter. So then moving from my fantasy books about detectives, I felt like that led into my true crime stuff. So I have The Devil in the White City and Thunderstruck by Eric Larson. I have Portrait of a Killer, Jack the Ripper Case Closed by Patricia Cornwell, The Five by Haley Rubenhold, Dead Men Do Tell Tales, which is a forensic anthropology book, and American Sherlock. And then that felt like it led me into my mystery books and mysteries and thrillers. So I've got my Agatha Christie books, and then a book about Agatha Christie. It's a fiction book about the time when Agatha Christie disappeared. Then I have The Devil in the Dark Water and The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. And from there, we're in kind of like my historical mystery from Agatha Christie on. So I have my Matthew Pearl books. I have the Dante Chamber, which is out of order because the Dante Club is the first book. There we go. And then also The Last Dickens, which is another kind of historical literary thriller. And then I have a historical mystery with The Alienist. And then these three, which are from June Her, The Silence of Bones, The Forest of Stolen Girls, and The Red Palace. All historical Korean mysteries. They're set in Korea in historical ages. And June Her's writing will absolutely punch you in the heart. And it's so good. Then we have a little more historical mystery with Umberto Eco's The Prague Cemetery. And the 3 of the 4 Cemetery of Forgotten Books series that I have by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I don't have Prisoner of Heaven, which is the 3rd one. And it's also, incidentally, the only one I've read, which is interesting. And I also have The Prince of Mist. Side note, I just love the cover for Labyrinth of Spirits. I think this is beautiful. And has lots of like beautiful gold foiling on it. Then I have my John Grisham books. So I have this one, which I'm really excited to have, because this is a, I think, 2nd printing version of the original book, and it is signed. So I've hung on to that one. And as you can see, I got it for like $2.50 at a used bookstore. So that's wild. That's the sort of a series though, so I have the other 2 books in the series, and then I have 2 others. The Runaway Jury, which I really like, and then The Broker, which is on my priority TBR for the year. So down here, we're still in my mysteries and thrillers. So I have some kind of modern, I think, more cozier mysteries. Actually, I'm going to move this, fit these. So I have The Verifiers by Jane Peck, Finlay Donovan is Killing It by El Casamano, and Death by Dumpling by Vivian Chen. And then I've got kind of more thrillery, All Her Little Secrets by One Named Morris. I've got A Darker Domain by Val McDermid. The Chestnut Man, which I've heard is really dark. The Magpie Murders, which I believe is the beginning of a series from Anthony Horowitz. Shut Your Eyes Tight, which is the 2nd book in a series. I've read the 1st book and unhauled it. I've actually read the 1st book twice. I really liked it. I just knew I wasn't going to read it again. I didn't feel like keeping it, so I need to read the 2nd book. And then I have a couple of thrillers I got at a used bookstore in my hometown. So I have Before I Go to Sleep by S.J. Watson, Into the Darkest Corner by Elizabeth Haynes, and Blind Faith by C.J. Lyons. And I got Pretty Girls because my partner and I were both trying to read it. We bought each other copies of it, which was kind of funny. He's finished it. I have not. And I have The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. And then I have my Keigo Higashino collection. So I have my copies of Malice and Newcomer, which are from the Detective Kaga series, and then Devotion of Suspect X, which is the Detective Galileo series. For that, I have The Decagon House Murders by Yukito Ayotsuji, which I believe also exists as a manga, which is fun. You might can tell at this point we're getting into like the more contemporary stuff, because then I also have The Appeal by Janice Hallett, which is mixed media email mystery. I have When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole, The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman, and then I have a kind of psychological thriller, The Hole, which sounds really interesting. I'm very excited to read this one. I picked it up on a whim at my local bookstore. And then I've got Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lee, 3 Assassins by Kotaro Isaka, Cherished Farah by Bethany C. Morrow. I think this one's a new one from this year, Hawk Mountain, but I think the cover is really cool, so it sounded interesting. And I have Sign Here by Claudia Lux, which I know is another one that everyone and their mother has been reading lately, and it sounds really interesting and really fun, so I'm looking forward to reading it. I have Loot by Jennifer Thorne, The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas, and then kind of tucked back here I have A Cosmology of Monsters by Sean Hamill and Little Stranger by Sarah Waters. I should mention that about here, I transitioned from thrillers into horror, so these all kind of fall more on the horror side of things. Alright, we've almost reached the bottom here, and we are fully into horror at this point, because I've got my Evil Within graphic novels, which go with one of my favorite video game series. These were just fine, but I love the series of games, so I've been holding on to them. And then, speaking of favorites, I have Stephen Graham Jones, who is one of my favorite authors. This is the book that got me into horror, The Only Good Indians. I picked it up when lots of people were reading it a couple of years ago and absolutely loved it. Then I've got the Indian Lake books. So I have My Heart is a Chainsaw and Don't Fear the Reaper, which I have not read yet. A couple of novellas with Night of the Mannequins Mapping the Interior, The Last Final Girl, and Mongrels. And then I have Empire of Wild by Sherry Dimeline. I've got some sci-fi horror with Dead Silence, and then Spooky Houses with The Death of Jane Lawrence, and Sundial, and also Nothing But Black and Teeth. And then I also have In the Dream House, because at this point, moving from Spooky Houses, I'm getting into my, like, creepy, dark nonfiction. So I have In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I have Nightmare Fuel by Nina Nesseth, which is a nonfiction about horror movies and how they scare us. A couple of ghost books picked up on travels. So I have a Savannah Spector's book and a Haunted History of New Orleans book. Then I have some medical history with Butchering Art and the Aspic Surgeon. And then I have The Poison Squad by Deborah Bloom, which is about a group of people who pushed for food safety regulations. And then these last couple I have Punishing Disease, which is about HIV and the criminalization of illness, which I started reading just before the pandemic hit, and so I stopped reading it. And then Underland, which I've heard is very existential, and it's a book about what is under the land. A deep time journey, it says. From here, we get into stuff that basically doesn't fit anywhere else. These are things that I've mostly read for classes, or that are kind of more literary and not in my normal wheelhouse. So I have A Small Place by Jamaica Kincaid, which is a brilliant piece of short nonfiction. I loved that. And also really love Migritude by Shilja Patel. And then we have African Titanics by Abu Bakr Khal. Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy, which kind of fits with horror. It's very creepy. Really interesting. I would definitely read more from this author. A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Absalom Absalom by William Faulkner. Mother Tongue by Demetria Martinez. Chronicles of a Death Foretold by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Sorry. I'm out of breath from moving the tripod. I love this book. This is a brilliant novella. It absolutely hooked my attention, and I read it on like Christmas Eve one year. I bought it that day and then just devoured it that day, and it's so interesting. It's about a murder that happens where everybody knows it's going to happen and no one stops it, and it's someone who is kind of going back to this town later to try and figure out how that happened. Then I have Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward and The Fathers by Ellen Tate, which I read for a class. Convenience Store Woman, which is another one I picked up on a whim at my local indie bookstore. And again, another book that I absolutely devoured in a single day and could not put down. This is super weird, and I definitely want to like reread it at some point because I don't think I've gotten everything out of it yet. Then I have A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles, which is a book my mom really liked. And then I have Where Am I Wearing by Kelsey Timmerman, which is a book I had to read when I was starting college. It was like the first year read for everybody. And the author came to our school, and I got my book signed. And he's written like, Where Are You Wearing? And then Be Curious, See the World. And he also recommended me John Scalzi's work, because apparently he grew up in the same town as John Scalzi. And yeah, he was a cool dude. And then I've got The Southern Hospitality Myth, which I got last semester for a paper. I've read a chunk of it, I haven't read all of it, but it's a really interesting look at how Southern hospitality operates as like a form of meaning making about the South. And then I've got a memoir I loved, which was No Ashes in the Fire by Darnell L. Moore. This is like brilliant and beautifully written and made me sob. Really enjoyed that, and I don't normally like memoirs all that much. And then I've got Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. Misread that as I pulled it out. Which is a book I recently got and I'm really excited to read because I've heard it's really interesting. Now, finally, the bottom shelf. I don't know how well you can see, and I am honestly just going to stay on this side of the camera. But I have Saga, the Compendium, all the way over there, and all of my manga here. This is, again, stuff that didn't really fit. So I got Way of the House Husband, Spy Family, and then I just got Phantom Tales of the Night, which sounds really interesting. And then after that, this is all miscellaneous nonfiction and reference books. So I have a Norton English anthology, which has a ton of stuff in it. It's a doorstop. It's a brick. You could kill someone with it. It's down here because I was scared to put it on any higher shelves, even though it's like a bunch of classics that really could have gone up on the top left. I think that would have been disastrous if I had put it there. And then I've got some like reference books for English study. How to Interpret Literature, and Perspectives on Literature. And then there's like a little tiny, like, literary theory book. Got a book on body language, Real Simple Guide to Real Life, Spanish-English Dictionary, This is an old loose paper textbook of social psychology, which I'm holding on to because I think it's interesting. I've got a bullet journal book. I've got my Ivermectin Kindy books. How to Be an Anti-Racist is brilliant. And also, if you get a chance, listen to the audiobook because the author reads it himself. And it was a great experience. I really enjoyed that. And it's really thought-provoking and fascinating. And then he has also this definitive history of racist ideas in America, which I need to read. But I've been kind of waiting for like the summer when I have some more time and energy put into it, because I know I'm going to really need to like sit with the ideas in there. Then I've got Musicophilia by Oliver Sacks, How to Do Nothing by Ginny Odell, Researches, Writings, Inventions of Nikola Tesla. I was really interested in Nikola Tesla a few years ago. I have this, The Spark of Learning, which is a book my mom was doing some sort of thing with at some point at work, and she had a bunch of extra copies, so I ended up with one, and it's about energizing the college classroom with the science of emotion. I thought it might be useful because at some point I think I would like to teach. And then I've got this Heatherwick book about Thomas Heatherwick, who is an inventor. He does some really cool stuff. Highly recommend looking up his studio. It's really interesting. And then I've got some psychology and sociology books from when I was an undergrad, some drawing books, D&D Player's Handbook, and some Sudoku books. And that's it. That's everything on these shelves. Alright, and now we have made it into the little shelf in my office, which has a lot of my things that kind of more naturally clumped into sections stuff. That's really eloquent, isn't it? So, first of all, we have the Tolkien shelf, which also has my amiibos on it. So we have a Simon from Castlevania, technically from Super Smash Brothers, really. And then we have a little Link from Breath of the Wild. And then I have this beautiful Pictures by J.R.R. Tolkien book. It was a birthday gift from my partner's mother, and the whole thing is just beautiful. It's a bunch of, I don't know how well I'm showing this to you because I can't actually see, but there goes the box. It's fine, the book is fine. Cat's probably freaking out. There you go. It's all like big color sketches and like a brief description of like which place in the world or what thing it's supposed to be. It's all really beautiful. I'm gonna put it away now before I do any more damage. And then behind it I have this Lord of the Rings puzzle that came in, I think, in a Lumicrate at some point. I have my original 3 or 4 of the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I originally had an older copy of The Hobbit, but I gave it to a friend so she could read it. And then I also have the Silmarillion and the Children of Húrin, and I have this little faux leather set as well. And then I can't really pull it out, but I have this little end cap thing that is I think the gates at the Mines of Moria. It's a Lord of the Rings inspired bookend. So put that back just a little bit further down, and I have my Sherlock Holmes shelf. And first of all, I have this like adorable little Lumi Bear that I ordered from Ciara Turner Art on Twitter. I love her artwork, and these little Lumi Bears are adorable. So he's gonna live right there. And then I have a Seasons edition of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which is just beautiful. And this is actually the edition I read of this. And then behind it, I have I think this came from the 1950s or 60s, I determined, 2-volume collection of the complete Sherlock Holmes. These are in pretty rough condition, but I got them for like 50 cents a piece or something. And I love these old books. So those live there. I do read out of them, but just not very frequently. And then I have a couple of books about like the methods of Sherlock Holmes, how to think like Sherlock, and also the Sherlock Holmes Handbook. And then I've got Sherlock Holmes inspired books on this side. So The Fifth Heart by Dan Simmons is a kind of fourth wall breaking Sherlock Holmes story. The Lost Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, based on an old radio show, I believe. The Angel of the Crows by Catherine Addison. It's the only Catherine Addison book that doesn't live in there. And it's because it's a kind of fantasy retelling with like fallen angels and hellhounds and vampires and things like that. Then we have the 2 kind of officially licensed continuations, which are The House of Silk and Moriarty by Anthony Horowitz. I have Arrowwood by McFinley, which is about a detective who hates Sherlock Holmes. And The Italian Secretary, which I think is about like Mycroft. And then I have this manga series. The other volume is elsewhere because I'm reading it this month. But this is a manga series called Moriarty the Patriot, and it's a kind of an origin story for Moriarty. It's like, what if he originally started out with good intentions and then spiraled from there to become the Napoleon of crime? And then, because it's not books, but because I love it, I will touch briefly on this shelf over here. This is books related. This is my weird shaped bookmarks that don't fit in the book pot that's usually on my other shelf. And then I have my Yakuza shelf. It's just all of my Yakuza games because I ran out of game storage. I have all of them except the very original, like PS1 or PS2 ones, but I have 0. I don't have Kiwami, the first one. I don't have Yakuza Kiwami because I got that one through PS Plus, but then I have Kiwami 2, the remastered collection which has 3, 4, and 5. I have 6. I have the new Like a Dragon ones with Ichiban instead of Kiryu, and I have, that's the steelbook for that one. I have Judgment, Lost Judgment, and then I just got Ishin, which also has the steelbook I just showed you. Okay, so you can see that this shelf is where my record player lives, and my record collection, and also a spare slip mat. I ended up with 2 because my partner gave me 2. He gave me his old record player because he really wanted me to get into vinyl, and it worked because I have a little collection. And then this is my friend's magnum opus. This says his pants are full of bread and his heart is full of love, which was a joke that we made about Jaskier in season 1 of The Witcher. And she made me this beautiful little picture, and I told her that I would frame it, so I did. And then this shelf is all of my Russian literature, and also a book by Gogol, which I think was Ukrainian, but it lives here because I'm out of space. But I've got some Bulgakov, so I have The Master and Margarita and Heart of a Dog. I have a collection of plays by Anton Chekhov, and also The Duel, which is a novella I really loved. And then I've got all of my Dostoevsky stuff. I've got this book, The Sinner and the Saint, which is by Kevin Birmingham, which is about the real-life person who inspired Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, which I have here. I have Demons and the Brothers Karamazov, and then The Village of Stepanchikovo. Why is that so hard to say today? And then, as I said before, I have Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol. Alright, so this last little bottom chunk of my shelves is, mostly electronics. I've got my receiver and a CD player for music, because I actually have a collection of CDs over there. And then this one, start in this middle shelf, because I like it. And also, this is the only non-book shelf. This is all of my PS2 games that I have. I just have like a small collection. Then this, we'll start with this bookshelf. This is all of my Sarah J. Maas books. They live here because I ran out of room, but the problem is she's still writing. And I know we're getting a 3rd book for that series and another book for this series. These are incredibly dusty. Oh my god. Got Akatar here, Crescent City, and then Throne of Glass in the back with Kingdom of Ash kind of lurking here at the edge. And yeah, so they live in here just so I could have space on my bigger bookshelves for other things. And then finally, again, these shelves are really dusty, I need to dust them. This last shelf down here is a fun one because this is all of my books from when I was a child that are like poetry books. This was a replacement one because I actually lost my original copy of Something Big Has Been Here, and I got this one more recently as a gift from my mom. Got like The Tale of Despero. I have The Fire Cat, which is not a book from my childhood, but one I was given recently when I graduated college by my supervisor at the time. And yeah, so she wrote me a little note in it that says like, you have big paws, do big things, which I think is adorable, so I'm holding on to that. And then I have Jabberwocky and Other Nonsense verses, some Shel Silverstein. I've got Ronnie Babbitt and Where the Sidewalk Ends. I've got a family of poems collected by Caroline Kennedy, which is incredibly dusty. I can see the dust in the air. And then lastly, a little Poetry for Young People Animal Poems book. Yeah, that is everything on both of my bookshelves. Well, there you have it. That is every book on my newly reorganized shelves. And I'm really pleased with this. I do need to fix something over here with the Sylvia Miranda Garcia books being missing from each other, but I will deal with that later. And yeah, that's it. I'm really pleased with how this has turned out. You may have noticed that there's quite a few unread books on my shelves, and I am actually going to, somewhere in here, put the number that you will hopefully have seen if I think to do it, a count. If not, there will be a number here of the total number of unread physical books on my shelves here, because I tend to think of my shelves as being more like a place for things that I want to read as opposed to things that I have read, in a sense. I saw a great tweet, and I can't actually find it anymore because I stupidly didn't save it, but there was somebody who tweeted that they think of their like bookshelves as a wine cellar but for books, where you have books collected that are going to be perfect for any mood. So at any time, whatever you want to read, you've got something for it. And that's really how I feel about my shelves. When I read, I tend to get rid of things that I am, you know, that I didn't love, or things that I've read and they were like just fine, but they're not things I see myself kind of coming back to and either rereading or referencing a lot. So I don't keep a lot of the books that I read. I do keep some of them. That's partially why my shelves are so heavily skewed towards unread. And the other reason is just that I collect things that I think that I'm going to love, things I'm excited about, and I do think of it as like a wine cellar for my books. So at any point, whatever mood I'm in, I have something for that mood, and I hope that that helps me to keep reading more and keep reading things that I love. So yeah, that's what my bookshelves look like now, and I'm gonna go put some decorations back on them. Probably fewer than I had before because it was getting a little difficult to get things off of the shelves. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me for this, and if you have made it to the end of this video, because I know it's probably quite long, put one of those little like the book stack emojis in the comments below. I think that that's very apt for what I've been working on today. But yeah, I really hope you've enjoyed this video, even though it's quite long, and if you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting every Tuesday and Saturday, so there is more content coming soon, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.